be very big from the worldly point of view. Thus, to be considered spiritual, an act must have far-reaching effects, or must substantially affect an extensive field of life. They are constantly judging the worth of an action by the magnitude of its consequences. Man is ordinarily so immersed in the objects of the gross world that the dimensions, magnitudes, and quantities of the gross world unconsciously creep into his estimate of spiritual worth and pervert his evaluation. All this confusion is due to the fact that man's mind is often dominated by mathematical ideas, even when it is concerned with estimates of a spiritual nature. But that which is spiritually great is different in kind from that which is mathematically great. The mathematical idea of infinity is constructed by imagining the collection of an infinite number of units, each of which has a fixed and identical value or importance. Actually, such mathematical infinity is unreachable even in imagination, because for any imaginable number we can conceive a number which would be still greater. Each unit is false if it is taken to have separate and exclusive existence or importance. The mathematical idea of infinity thus turns out to be a product of an imagination activated by false assumptions. Spiritual infinity is not a result of imaginative additions of the false. It is reality itself, which is perceived when false imagination is at rest. The infinity of the truth cannot suffer any increase through addition, nor can it suffer any decrease through subtraction. In fact, nothing can be added to it, and nothing can be taken away from it, because it is all inclusive and leaves no room for any other great, small, or great. It is immeasurable, indivisible, and integral. Let me just go over to this one on God and the individual. Bible says that God is infinite. He is beyond the opposites of good and bad, right and wrong, virtue and vice, birth and death, pleasures and suffering. Such dual aspects do not belong to God. If we take God as one separate entity, he becomes one term in relational existence. Just as good is the counterpart of bad, God becomes the counterpart of not God, and the infinite comes to be looked upon as the opposite of the finite. When we talk of the infinite and the finite, we are referring to them as two, TWO, and the infinite has already become the second part of the duality. But the infinite belongs to the non-dual order of being. If the infinite is looked upon as the counterpart of the finite, it is, strictly speaking, no longer infinite, but a species of the finite, for it stands outside the finite as its opposite, and is thus limited. Since the infinite cannot be the second part of the finite, the apparent existence of the finite is false. The infinite alone exists. God cannot be brought down to the domain of duality. There is only one being in reality, and it is the universal soul. The existence of the finite or the limited is only apparent or imaginary. Someone once asked Baba if it would be possible to realize God with the finite. And Baba smilingly replied, "There is no finite."
Darwin, let me just turn the fan off a while so we can
right? The infinity of the truth remains unaffected by any changes in the universe. All that happens in the universe is phenomenal, and as such amounts to zero from the viewpoint of the truth. An earthquake, for example, is regarded as an appalling and disastrous calamity by the worldly minded because of the immense destruction of life and property which it brings. However, even a calamity like this cannot in any way touch the infinite truth which is at the heart of reality. In fact, the spiritual infinity of the truth does not suffer any limitation even if the entire universe is dissolved. Therefore, it is futile to measure it in terms of what is great according to the standards of the world. The illusion which most aspirants find difficult to shake is the belief that infinite truth is an object which has to be attained in some distant future, and that all life is just a means for this attainment. If truth were to be confined only to the future and not to the present or the past, it would not be infinite. It would at once become limited as an event which has its origin in time. All that life is and has is at once deprived of intrinsic significance if it comes to be regarded as merely instrumental to some far-off event. This is definitely a false point of view that truth is an object to be attained in the future. Life is not meant to be rich in spiritual significance at some distant date, but it is so at every moment if the mind is disburdened of illusions. Only through a clear and tranquil mind is the true nature of spiritual infinity grasped as something which is not yet to be, but which already has been, is, and ever will be, an eternal self-fulfillment. How's that for a definition? Wow. Oh, that's heavy, I'm telling you. Life is not meant to be rich in spiritual significance at some distant date, but it is so at every moment if the mind is disburdened of illusions. Baba says in another discourse that eternity is truth which has shed the mask of the mind. Only through a clear and tranquil mind is the true nature of spiritual infinity grasped as something which is not yet to be, but which already has been, is, and ever will be, an eternal self-fulfillment. When every moment is rich with eternal significance, there is neither the lingering clinging to the dead past, nor a longing expectation for the future, but an integral living in the eternal now. Only through such living can the spiritual infinity of the truth be realized in life. It is not right to deprive the present of all importance by subordinating it to an end in the future, for this means the imaginary accumulation of all importance in the imagined future rather than the perception and realization of the true importance of everything that now exists. There cannot be ebb and tide in eternity. No meaningless intervals between intermittent harvests, but a fullness of being which cannot suffer impoverishment of a single instant. When life seems to be idle or empty, it is not due to any curtailment of the infinity of the truth, but it is due to one's own lack of capacity to enter into its full possession. Just as it is not right to pile up all spiritual importance for some anticipated future, it is equally not right to arrogate it exclusively to things that create a dough. The great and grand things of life are not the only ones surcharged with spiritual meaning. A thing need not be unusual or particularly striking in order to be spiritually significant. The unusual and the striking exist relative to the usual and the habitual, and they are not in themselves necessarily representative of absolute spiritual beauty. Thus, it is not necessary for a man to give huge sums of money for a cause in order to be spiritually great. A poor man may be unable to do this, and yet be nonetheless spiritual if he gives what he can. It is not the amount that endows the gift with spiritual meaning. It is the spirit in which it is given. In fact, a large donation may often be accompanied with pride or some selfish motive, and when it loses its spirit, and then it loses its spiritual value. Even a small gift, given with humility and utterly unselfish love, is endowed with a much greater spiritual value. I recall one time Ahmednagar, in 1954, when Mayor Baba was giving darshan to several thousand people one afternoon in the Kushru quarters where Adi's office is, a little sort of a slightly raised platform with an overhanging shade and been placed there and a chair on it. And Baba disregarded the chair and sat down on the edge of the platform with his feet right on the ground. And people from all walks of life were coming to him to have contact with him, to touch his hands, to put beautiful and sweet-smelling garlands around his neck, or to bring fruit or whatever. And there were old people, young people, lame people, very, very poor people, apparently wealthy people, and even big Sikh warriors, army men, with their turbans and all, and people obviously from every religious background in India, and all felt very comfortable to come humbly before Meher Baba and to have their little brief contact with him. And sometimes even little boys would come and they didn't feel shy, and Baba would have a little fun with them. He'd have a little horseplay with them and generally wind up by putting a garland as a treasure for them to take with them around their neck. But I was very much struck one time when one very little old lady came, and she was obviously very poor, and she reached down after bowing down to Baba's feet. She reached down and put the smallest denomination of an Indian coin, what is it, a pie or whatever it is, on his foot, and then she humbly walked away. And this must have touched Baba's heart, because he just stopped everything and sat there looking at it for a long time. And one would imagine that he was going in spirit after this woman with his heart and his love and his blessing. It was like a scene in the New Testament again. Things like that often happened around Baba. And then he just turned his foot and let it fall off on the dirt on the side there, and then went on with the whole program. But it was an incident that evoked his attention. It wasn't a big or outstanding thing. She didn't come with a lot of money to endow his cause or anything of that sort. A tiny little coin, but it evoked precious moments of the avatar's attention and mind. I think not. That's why he let it slide off his foot after the thing. Spiritual life is not a matter of quantity, but of inherent quality of living. Spiritual infinity includes in its scope all phases of life. It comprises acts which are great as well as acts which are small. We found this out around Baba. It's great to tell you about the big darshan programs and wonderful things that happen, spectacular things. But we also discovered that even the most commonplace, prosaic, ordinary things that we were doing with him or around him were filled with just dripping with significance. Every little thing. Even if we played marbles with him or table tennis, or we were just walking along with him, every moment was just precious and filled with a divine significance, which we were somehow brought into and could experience. Being greater than the greatest, spiritual infinity is also smaller than the smallest, and it can equally express itself through happenings irrespective of whether they are outwardly small or great. Thus, a smile or a look stands on the same level as offering one's life for a cause, when the smile or the look springs from truth consciousness. There are no gradations in spiritual importance when all life is lived in the shadow of eternity. If life were to consist only of big things, and if all the little things were to be omitted from its scope, it would not only be finite, but would be extremely poor. The infinite truth, which is latent in everything, can reveal itself only when life is seen and accepted in its totality. Limitation comes into existence owing to ego-centered desires and self-will. Possessiveness, in all its forms, leads to a life of limitation. For example, if one covets the love of someone and instead of winning the love of that person loses it to another, there ensues a narrowing down and strangling of the free life of the spirit, and one has an acute consciousness of limitation. This is the origin of the pain of suffocating jealousy. But if one looks at the situation with a heart purged of longing, the love which is received by the other will be seen in its natural beauty and in the clarity of perception which comes through non-possessiveness. One will not only taste of the freedom of non-duality, but also of its joy. When someone else receives that love, it is like oneself receiving it, since no longer does one insist upon the claims of a single form, having identified oneself with life in all its forms. That's a kind of a hard one to grow into, isn't it? Yeah. I think Baba has so many ways of really bringing this difficult lesson to us. One, for example, is to teach us to love another individual without wanting anything from the other individual, and to discover that one is with the other person in spirit. This helped me a great deal as a result of a letter I received from Baba in which he said, "Those who are united in love are always in spirit and know no separation." And through love, which asks for nothing, one finds a pure and a free kind of love, which actually is its own fulfillment. Love which does not ask for anything is its own fulfillment. And one may discover, if one is perceptive, that one at that level is already united with the other, at the level of the spirit. As Baba said, those who are united in love are always in spirit and know no separation. We do have to learn this lesson, and it can apply to not just one other person, but can go in many directions, to many, and eventually include all humanity. But it's a difficult lesson, and Baba has gone into greater depth in describing all of this in his discourse on love. In non-duality, there is freedom from limitation. Now, what does he mean by non-duality? There may be a new term for some here. But duality is where our consciousness is at play most of the time. Gain and loss, beginning and end, pleasant and unpleasant, and you could go on and on and on. And this is where our consciousness is caught, swinging from one extreme to the other at the dual level. And we even try to find truth and lasting happiness in this level of duality. And we never succeed because it isn't there. And Mayor Baba has explained to us clearly for those who have to have it explained intellectually in order to dare to step out farther away from the self, that we do have to, at long last, through growth and maturity, rise above the tyranny and the domination of the opposites, and rise into the freedom of the spirit, where we are free of this kind of domination. This is the thing that he has come to bring to us. One time in India, this feeling was so prevalent that I had to capture something of it in writing. This may be a little bit difficult for some to understand, but if you don't understand it, just put it aside. I wrote this down on September 23rd, 1954 at Meher Retreat in Urbad, India. And it just somehow seemed to capture the feeling that one got there around Baba. And this is it. Does everything function? The opposites, the gains and losses, the beginnings and endings, and all the opposites. Let them function automatically. Don't interfere. Just observe and rise as you let go of one after the other of the necessary functions of the dual realm. Cease striving to mold the functioning elements of your aspect of the dual realm into truth. You will only achieve another crystallization of one of the opposites in that realm. What you seek, what you are, is not in that realm. So let it function only to give you consciousness in that realm and be detached. In the dual realm, we do and must struggle with contrasting values. In this realm, we must adhere to the karmic laws and strive to improve our character, to purify and live in accordance with our ideals. This we will always continue to do. Beyond the dual realm, however, the same values do not hold true. One cannot escape the vortex of the dual realm while clinging to it. It is not a matter of perfecting oneself in the dual realm. It is a matter of escaping the bondage of identifying oneself in that realm at all. Escape from the dual realm means a new rate of vibration, a new perspective of value, a new sense of dissociation from the necessary functioning elements of the dual realm. Why strive to become something in the dual realm when you have to let the whole realm go? It functions, let it function, and be free. And this sort of crazy little poem that may amuse you. Dance for joy in the meaningless array, for all is void in the sight of God. Cease thy struggles with the coils of illusion. Let it go unchallenged, unclaimed, and smile with God. For all is a trick, a joke which never was. Be not deceived by the enchantment of a distant freedom. O ye who were never bound, laugh the trammel of Maya. That was it.
Do you do that often? I mean, I don't mean.
Did you write that one?
Do you on occasion, or have you in years gone by, been given to writing personalized things like this?
I may have a few more to read.
In other words, you have compiled evidently a collection of writing on your own behalf, right? That you from time to time refer to and maybe you read out, right?
Well, let's get back to the Baba thing. So much for a little thought on what duality is. In non-duality, there is freedom from limitation. It means individual freedom. We get free inwardly from all limitations when we let go of duality, the opposite, the free of it. We can't do that by ourselves. We need the help of someone like Meher Baba, His love and His grace, and to hold on to His guidance or His hand, and to finally take our stand upon truth rather than duality, and live from the truth rather than the values of duality. So in non-duality there is freedom from limitation, and the knowledge and appreciation of things as they are, In non-duality alone is there the realization of true spiritual infinity that secures abiding and unfading bliss. The limitation of jealousy is, like all other limitations, such as anger, hate, and craving, they are all one's own creation. All finitehood and limitation is subjective and self-created. We have created the limitations within ourselves, and we think that life is making us limited. It is only we who have made those limitations, and we can throw them off.
I had a thought one time while thinking about duality that came up with this analogy. I'm sure we've all sat in uncomfortable chairs, and so you begin to shift. You're on one point, but after a while, the place you shifted that gave you relief becomes uncomfortable, and you shift back. The only way to really remedy the situation is actually, there's nothing you can do in the chair, any position you assume will make you become uncomfortable. The only thing to really do is stand up. and that's how it is in duality.
Right.
Any position you assume is bound to be uncomfortable eventually.
But you see, heretofore in the past, we didn't know that we could step out of duality. And we might have been imagining all sorts of things and maybe taking a risk and getting into trouble. But now we know that this is normal. We can step out of duality with His help. And we're meant to sooner or later. So, to stand up from that uncomfortable chair. So, all finitehood and limitation is subjective and self-creating. With the surrenderance of self-will and ego-centered imagination, there arises a true perception of the infinite worth of that which is. When the infinity of the truth is adequately grasped from the point of view of non-duality, it also becomes fruitful for the adequate solution of social problems based on duality as an irreducible fact. Mere manipulation of numbers, however clever, can neither yield right adjustment between the individual and society, nor can it yield true harmony between various groups which come to exist within the society. If social claims of a general nature are determined by the considerations of a small minority, the interests of the vast majority remain unreconciled, and the majority remains inevitably in rivalry and opposition to the minority. On the other hand, in democratic countries, the claims of a general nature are determined by consideration of majority viewpoint rather than by the minority. This point of view, however, is still within the domain of duality, where the many exist, and therefore the problem of minorities remains unsolved. Since their interests remain unreconciled, the minority remains inevitably in rivalry and opposition to the majority. As long as a social problem is dominated by the idea of numbers and multiplicity, there is no lasting solution for it. The lasting solution can come only when it is illuminated by the truth of the indivisible totality and intrinsic unity of all. The one in all cannot be contacted through the multiplication of the many, but only by shedding the false idea of the many. Any number, however great, is bound to be finite. Spiritual infinity is not a number, however great. It is the sole reality without a rival. Where there are many, there is necessarily comparison between them. There is a smaller and a greater, a hierarchy of claims, privileges, and rights, and all valuation gets twisted by the recognition of gradations of different types. From the spiritual point of view, all these are forms of false consciousness, because the same truth vibrates in everyone. The similarity which is experienced in realization, however, is necessarily from the principle of equality. That is, that one person is equal to any other single person in respect to claims, rights, and worth, but can never be equal within duality to two or more persons. On the other hand, the spiritual infinity of the truth has room for the paradox that one person can be regarded as the totality itself. Therefore, one person is not only capable of being looked upon as equal in importance to two or more persons, but even as equal to all.